Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday, 25 October. Just getting ready for the Outsiders, and hopefully, First Dog on the Moon will be a separate broadcast.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not. Your guest this morning, Terry Barnes, policy consultant, is a former Howard government advisor. Dr. Michaela Novak is a senior fellow for the Institute of Public Affairs, and Guy Rundle is a correspondent at large for Crikey. Crikey's International Man of Mystery. He's a former editor of Arena magazine. Welcome all.
Hi.
How did we all enjoy our Festival of Malcolm yesterday? Of course, the Prime Minister turned 61. A monumental occasion, greeted with great joy and celebration of the nation's press.
Well, the Festival of Malcolm is going to run for some time, so I think we should pace ourselves. I mean, I think this man could be Prime Minister until 2078 if he wishes to, by downloading his mind to a robot and then having the robot elected as Prime Minister. So I would say that we've had a substantial shift in Australian politics.
It certainly has that feeling, Michaela. I mean, it's early days, but he seems comfortable in the position.
Yes, certainly very early days, and perhaps one could look forward to many, many years of Robo Malcolm. But look, certainly the opinion polls are very heavily in his favour. So there's a warm, hallowed glow around his figure. But I'd like to just see what happens when push comes to shove on budget time. For example, and so these will be really the difficult tests ahead, I think, for the government.
And yet, Terry, we have this sort of new politics now, honing in on that sensible centre of legend. It's consultative. Paul Kelly, for those of you who remain conscious up to about the 10th or so paragraph yesterday, took us back to the comparison there with Bob Hawke as another consensus politician. I wonder if there's an interesting comparison, we'll throw this around, but between that period, the Hawke government, following a period of really contested and adversarial politics post-1975, with what we have now, another sort of consensual moment following the tumult of the last 4 or 5 years.
Interesting. Malcolm Turnbull bringing Australians together. I mean, that's what Bob Hawke said, wasn't it? I think the thing with Malcolm at the moment is that he is clearly trying to show that he learned the lessons of Malcolm first time round, and when he was opposition leader, that he wasn't consultative, that it was his way or the highway, and that his policy agenda was the only agenda worth talking about. He has seen, in my mind, he is going to great extremes, great lengths to prove that Malcolm is dead, buried, and cremated, if I can borrow a phrase.
It sounds eerily familiar.
But I think, as Michaela says, we have to see if Malcolm walks the walk over time, as opposed to talking the talk when the honeymoon is at it. Even Alexander Downer had a honeymoon, let's put it that way.
What if, Guy, that the honeymoon becomes the extended reality? I mean, why does this have to stop?
Oh, look, well, that's right. I think the question of Turnbull's political skills is exactly right. They may be great. They may fall off a cliff in a few months' time. But what has happened is a substantial realignment, not just in Australian politics, but in global politics. And that's Trudeau in Canada and also Cameron in Britain. And that's, to put it very simply, it's a recombination of classes and ideologies, in the sense that the old formula of social conservatism and economic liberalism no longer works in the same way that it did, and it certainly doesn't work in the hysterical version that Abbott applied. What now works is a far more progressivist social ideology combined with a centre-right economic liberalism, and whoever can grab that
has the keys to the door.
And the losers from that are the social conservatives in any party.
Which is interesting, Michaela. I mean, in the Australian conservative sense, and it's interesting to have that Trudeau example of this, as Guy suggests, that sort of a change in sentiment globally. But for Australian conservatives, it's the rise of the centrist libertarian against the social conservative religious right, as Eric Abetz would not have us put it.
Yeah, look, I think that we have to sort of just focus on the fact that the so-called realignment's probably only strictly limited to the Anglosphere at the moment, and that's it's a temporal thing because there will be swings and roundabouts. But I do think the point is well made. There is more than one way to progress a liberal style of policy. You can do it through expanding economic freedom. You can do it by expanding personal, civic, political freedoms, social freedoms. So I think there is a potentially constructive relationship in the long run between so-called left and right, depending on how you sort of see those things, to the extent that you can actually find collaborative change that extends freedom. Now, in Australia in the 80s, there seemed to be a joint exercise to increase our relative economic freedom, like tariff cuts and micro reform and the like. So if we're seeing now perhaps a different iteration of that, a forging of greater social freedom, civil rights, for example, the marriage equality issue would be one good example.
Well,
of that.
it's those moments, isn't it, Terry? And as Malgollum there mentions the 80s with that sort of economic reform agenda, which was a fairly shared set of ideas between the major political parties.
That's right.
Are we at that point now where there's a consensus around the sort of the major policy moments, the major policy ideas?
I think there's certainly opportunity for a consensus. One thing about Turnbull is he does seem to be moving the coalition towards the centre. The question is whether the Labor Party on the other side will also come back to the centre from flirting particularly, well, not just with the socially progressive left, but certainly with its ongoing symbiotic relationship with the union movement. So, but on the other hand, I think it's also a question of atmospherics. I mean, you talked about Justin Trudeau. I see Turnbull as Justin Trudeau with a brain.
It's not quite as
Well,
far.
but
it's worth pointing out that Trudeau has actually gone to the left economically. I mean, the reason Trudeau triumphed and the Liberals triumphed over the New Democratic Party, which was the Labor type Canada Party, was the Labor type party. The New Democratic Party went to the centre on deficit reduction and surplus budgeting, and Trudeau went to the left and said what we need is a deficit budget to deal with this recession. So so let's not go overboard. The triumph of Trudeau was a victory for the left.
But can I say though, Guy, I think the thing about Trudeau and the Liberals in Canada is that they campaigned on a note of optimism, and Turnbull is trying to do the same here.
And Turnbull, interestingly, I think he had a really a very telling moment in his parliamentary week, and the conversation went to same-sex marriage. And Bill Shorten suggested that the policy of the plebiscite would unleash some fairly dark argument and risk social cohesion. And this was the Prime Minister's response.
I have great faith in the decency, in the common sense, in the humanity, in the wisdom of the Australian people. And if there are unruly voices heard, they will be drowned out by the common sense and the respect and the general humanity of our people.
It was a really good answer, Terry. A good answer in and of itself, but also a good answer because it drew together behind him the entirety of his party. They could see the sense in this, and Turnbull is not necessarily is a recent convert to the idea of the plebiscite, but he was strengthened parliamentary approach, but also a uniting in the benches in the Liberal Party.
Well, that's very true, Jonathan. I think what Turnbull did in that answer, and actually on the whole same-sex plebiscite issue, is that he recognised that the Liberal Party in particular is a broad church. It has its progressive wing and its conservative wing, and he's found that there is a consensus in the party room and probably in the broader Liberal Party, and probably even more widely in the Australian community, that favours this approach, that if the public says that same-sex marriage will happen through a plebiscite, then it will happen. And he flat-footed Bill Shorten because he's effectively saying, I trust the people, you don't.
Of course, and we saw a telling week as well, Malgollum, because we saw Joe Hockey leaving the scene. So the last of the wreckage of the Abbott moment is being cleared away, I guess, where this is clear air in Hockey's departure.
Perhaps in sort of rhetorical terms and sort of political packaging terms, but I mean, when you look at the sort of budgetary facts, we still have the same economic problems now. I think everyone's pretty much sunk the boot into sort of Hockey this week, and I think that he's talked a big game, especially in the lead up to his ascension to Treasurer, but didn't deliver, and did not deliver in spades. In fact, in some respects, raised taxes, the very things that he so that he posed initially. So yeah, people sunk the boot in, maybe not unjustified.
Well, a treasurer guy who came in talking about budgetary emergency and increased debt, increased deficit,
Well,
raised taxes, as Michaela
the
said.
Abbott hockey government came in on a dual and contradictory thing. The first thing, they won, and they won big, by pretty much promising to retain huge swathes of the Labor program on Gonski, on a whole lot of other issues. And that was the price of getting that big victory. Now, if they'd gone for a smaller victory by saying we've got to rein it in, we've got to have there are going to be tough times ahead,
Being honest,
they would have had a mandate for the changes they put in the 14 budget. They didn't have a mandate. And look at the polls. It's like the polls are like a red-blue bow tie, and the knot is at the budget. You know, Abbott's polls went, you know, as soon as the budget was on, they sank below Labor, and Labor went upwards, and that was all it was about. And yeah, that's one of hockey's many failures.
Our outsiders here on Sunday Extra with Guy Rundle, Michaela Novak, and Terry Barnes. And Terry, that's another interesting thing about Turnbull's approach. And this past week in particular, he's now starting to talk about the things that he will take to a campaign, and those things are not just being Labor light. Those things are clear distinctions in policy direction.
Well, he is starting to define himself as descended from but separate to the Abbott hockey period. And on hockey, I think there is a left-right unity ticket in terms of hockey's failure, sadly to say. But at the moment, though, there's still a strong element of continuity. And if I was Labor, I'd still continue doing what they're doing, which is basically hammering that point. Not that they're doing it pretty well against the headwinds of the polls.
Yes, and Michaela, what's the sense? You're with the IPA, which had a leading role in influencing, I think, the policy thinking of Tony Abbott on hockey previously. I mean, what's the sense of receptiveness now, or the sense of input, do you think?
Oh, look, I think that the underlying sort of policy issues are fairly much the same as they are. And I mean, taxation is sort of one sort of totemic sort of issue that my organisation would sort of refer to. And so we're sort of seeing with some concern the nature of the shifting of the debate in terms of higher taxes. So there's still a little bit of work, I think, from a sort of economic freedom perspective.
And yet Turnbull, Guy, just a final point, is playing that tough, hard game of not ruling in, not ruling out, is actually doing us as voters the privilege, the honour of saying that there are options and we will canvass them.
Well, that's right. And a lot of his problems have been solved by the fact that the 2014 budget was such a train wreck that most of it didn't get through. So it's a dead letter. I mean, the Medicare copay and all that stuff seems a million years ago now. So he's got a bit of a clean slate to create a new style of government. And it comes down to the cultural issues that Abbott was really, despite all he promised not to do, trying to impose a whole series of conservative cultural and ways of governing that we just never agreed to and that don't cut with the grain of Australian society anymore.
Politics has a remarkable capacity to self-correct from those moments, and I think we're witnessing that in full force right now. Thank you all. Terry Barnes, policy consultant, former Howard advisor, Michaela Novak, who's senior fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs, and Guy.
Okay, there we go. First dog on the moon apparently is about to come.